Ubuntu is one of the most common distributions out there, but it's based on and built upon Debian. So when we look at configuring one, it's very similar to configuring the other. And that's the case with network files. Now, I want to show you where to find the different network files on an Ubuntu or Debian system, but it's important to note that in the last iteration of their long-term support for Ubuntu, that's when a change has been made to how the network is configured and what files are used and how those files are configured. Now, there is one commonality between them, and that's if you use Network Manager to manage your network instead of editing the configuration files. That hasn't changed. You can still use that across all the versions that are current with Ubuntu and Debian, but these two ways have changed. So first, I want to look at the older version of Ubuntu. And when I say older, I mean one that's still valid to use as of the date today. You can still use version 16.04. Let's see what version this is. Etc. OS release. So this is Ubuntu 16.04.1 LTS, long-term support, and this is still, as of today, a valid version of Ubuntu to use in production. But this is configured by going into the etc. network directory, and there's a single file in here called interfaces. So if we look at interfaces, we're going to see this is how you configure a network interface with an older version of Ubuntu or Debian. Now, this is pretty much the stanza that you configure. There's usually something in here you can look at and base it off of, but this is the format for it. We're not going to go through the, configuring different things. It's pretty straightforward. You don't have to indent. This is just for ease of readability, but this is how you configure a network interface via the configuration files. Now, we could still use the network manager if we were on a GUI system. Like this is a GUI system, we could use that, but I'm actually SSH'd into a server that doesn't have a GUI interface, and that's where we use these network files to configure it. So let's quit this one. This is how you configure an older version, but a modern version like 18.04 or the most modern version of Debian uses a completely different network configuration system. Now here we're on a newer version of Ubuntu. This is actually 18.04. Let's check that out. So this is 18.04.1, another long-term support release of Ubuntu. And this one uses the net plan system for configuring network interface. So if you go into etc. net plan and you look in here, depending on what kind of system you have, you're going to have some sort of file in here. It's either going to be like 01 networkmanager.yaml or 50 cloudinit.yaml if it's a server. The thing about YAML files, though, let's look at this. YAML files do depend on indentation in order to be properly configured. So while with the etc. network interfaces of the old Ubuntu system, it didn't matter how things were indented, here it really, really does. And so here, this is where we would configure like a static IP address. And here's our IP addresses, gateway, name servers. The format's a little different, but it's fairly similar conceptually to the old system. Like I said, except for that white space. That's really important that it's indented properly. So if you make a change to this, then you just would do sudo netplan apply, and then it will activate the new changes that you made. Now, I do want to point out, again, this is a GUI system, so it has Network Manager, but there's also NMTUI, which is Network Manager Text User Interface, and then you can edit interfaces using just the text boxes on your screen if you don't have a GUI system installed. So that's just one more way that you can edit your file in Ubuntu or Debian if you don't have a GUI, but you want to use Network Manager as opposed to just configuring those files on your own. Whether you have an older system using etc. network interfaces or a newer system using configuration files and etc. netplan, configuring the network on Debian and Ubuntu is not difficult. And it's usually just a matter of changing what's existing. But if you want to use the network manager to manage all of those interfaces, either using GUI or text tools, you can do that as well. It's very flexible, and even with the change in versions, it's not a whole lot more difficult to do one over the other. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.